At this time, I was asked to offer a prayer, and I'd like to introduce myself first. How mitakiapi waki imachiapi si changu lakota chamakochiki mataha, Minneapolis Ewatielo. So my name is Joaquin Lapointe, and so I want to offer this beginning prayer first with the song, but I often like to speak about these medicines first before I go into it. We got Chinshasha and Pejikota, which is our traditional tobacco and our traditional sage. Our Zile and Wopakinta, which is we use to wipe off and strengthen our spirit. But at the center of these medicines and our beliefs, in this Lakota way, we have a Wonachik, Sapa, where we live in spiritual balance and wisdom with all life. And we believe that we have a Nachi, a spirit in each and every one of us that connects us all to Tonkashla and Wakantanka, creator. And so as I offer this prayer, I want to ask for Wichozani na Wichoni, health, long life and resilience, and Woyanka, protection, Wola Kota, peace, and Woyunskia, joy for what we're about to do. And for all the participants that are here today to join me in this Wochekie, this prayer, Tawachi Wanji na Chante Wanji, one heart, one mind. And so I'm holding my Chinshasha, and if you have yours too, I ask that you pray with yours as soon as I begin this song, and I'll close my part with a prayer in the Lakota language. And so I'm starting to light this Pejichota. And at this time, you can light yours if you have your sage as well. And Akinta, wipe off, and to also strengthen yourself for the powerful conversations that you're about to have. And so I'll sing this song, and it says, I give this to you, my friend. Look, with this Chinshasha, this prayer, I send my prayer, and this is what I say. And I'll sing this song, and then I'll follow in a prayer, asking for the things I just talked about, and for compassion and to help each other in this work. Checho welo, hey, hey. Kaula waya kaya, checho welo, hey, hey. Cha sha sha wa ka cha, checho welo, hey ya, hina zia u welo, hey. Kaula waya kaya, checho welo, hey. Wo yai wa ka cha, checho welo, hey ya, hina zia u welo, hey. Takashla wakanta kawana, oyatiki, okiapo chawashiki le dayan, chumpik te na, chanshasha yuha, chekiapiki, tiwahe na tioshpaiki, owichakiapi, te okiapo na, oyatik kachana wakaisa, ihamle washte, wichakupo, laku unki, washikile, chumpiki. Cha ayatet kacha zani pikte na ayatet kacha wechoni pikte. Wakan piki okiapo unslapo. Wacheke tokadake washte yuha pikte cha lakoya na lakoi choka kiksuya pikte. Na dako ota washte wayanka pikte. Dayan igluha pikte na wo chante na wo ayanka wo yuskia. Yuha pikte okiapo. O lakota na wanachik sapa. Pikte okiapo. Woblat kankachich upelo. How mitaki yasi. So I'll set this Chinshasha out now that my part is over, and I'll put it out by a tree. And I prayed for those things I mentioned earlier, wanachik sapa, spiritual balance with the universe and all life, with the ones that we love, and to help each other and to live in that wisdom together as we do this work. Thank you.
Ani, everybody. My name is Josh Hudson, and I wanted to just give a quick little background on why we're here today. So I previously worked with the National Native Network, which was housed out of the Intertribal Council of Michigan. And so part of the National Native Network is to do training and technical assistance around commercial tobacco and cancer prevention and control. And so the National Conference on Tobacco or Health, or NCTOH, was held in 2019 in Minneapolis. And so a part of that, we held a strategy session, essentially a roundtable before NCTOH started. And we had around 50 people show up. And we were just talking about, what if we had our own national tribal tobacco conference? What would that look like? And so that's what the conversation started around, and it's formulated into today's sneak peek, and then the actual presentation in the spring. Well, not this presentation, but the conference in the spring. And so as a part of that, there's some really cool work that's happening with the American Indian Cancer Foundation. I've since left the National Native Network, and I now work for my tribe, but I wanted to offer a couple quick words and some insight on how we got here today. So miigwech for attending today, and I'm excited to hear what everyone has to say when we break out into our sessions. But first, we have a really good keynote coming up.
Such good medicine we're starting out today with. My name is Coco Villas, and I'm the Health Equity Manager for the American Indian Cancer Foundation, and I'm tuning in from the Dakota Nakota Ancestral Homelands in Northeast Montana. And it is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce Lori Newbreast. Lori is a member of the Amskapi Pakani Blackfeet Nation in Montana, and is a member of the Blackfeet Confederacy. For over 25 years, she has worked with tribal, indigenous, federal, national, state, international entities, public and private foundations in the worldwide commercial tobacco control movement to address the principles and strengths of cultural practices to reject the continued inequitable harm of commercial tobacco in American Indian, Alaska Native, and other indigenous communities. Some of Lori's professional experiences has included being the former director of the Blackfeet Nation's tobacco program, and is where Lori developed a strategy for the Blackfeet Tribal Business Council to pass the first ever codified commercial tobacco-free ordinance of any American Indian tribe in the country. So I'm just going to give a round of applause because that's amazing. She really set the stage. Lori's also participated in the World Health Organization Indigenous Peoples Forum on Tobacco Use Development, and served on the Montana Governor's Tobacco Advisory Board from 2004 to 2007. Lori's list of amazing roles she has participated in to help pioneer and change, for the better well-being of all of our American Indian communities has been phenomenal, and she remains dedicated to the principles of self-determination and cultural expression in the development of viable practices to support Indigenous people's well-being. So without further ado, I would love to introduce Lori Newbreast.
Good afternoon. I really enjoyed the opening, so I want to give thanks to the planning committee and everybody who contributed to that. And but I'd also like to introduce myself. Okay, Nitaniko Aste Nikki Iwa. I almost started saying else. And I am a member of the Blackfoot Confederacy, and I am coming to you from our traditional homeland. So I'm really at home. And you may hear my pug who's been asleep, but I might have to just quickly put her out. There she goes. So it's really nice for me to be here today, but I'm going to ask for 30 seconds because she is relentless. And that's how we must be moving forward, relentless, dedicated. Thank you for your patience and flexibility. Those need to be branded on a t-shirt. That's the pandemic way. So this morning when I was putting together final touches and making sure I included everything, I put together this beautiful t-shirt banner. So I am brought to you today on through the Creative Connections project that is part of the American Indian Cancer Foundation Robert Wood Johnson grant, to really offer that focus into what is tobacco. So I'm going to start there. And there's another t-shirt I had. I thought about putting it up and I was like, you know, but t-shirts, counter marketing is one of the keystones of the current tobacco movement. And in Indian country, that was a prevention technique far beyond this current movement. And the power of symbol, the power of collective thought, people coming together in a good way to really say, how can we keep what is really healthy and good and support in our community practices, our cultural practices, and how do we begin to plan for the future? So that is given the energy it needs, the support it needs, really helping people understand this sort of this journey. So I always like to start, they gave me Coco will come on probably in the chat and say, you got 5 minutes. But I would like to start at the beginning, 1491. That's my little joke. But the indigenous tobacco control existed long before 1491. And so we're the living generation that has inherited a lot of resiliency and strengths in our culture, but also there's a thread moving through that timeline to now. So as we move forward in tobacco, and I was kind of scanning the faces and the names, some of them I recognize from, they've been in tobacco control a long time. Some people have morphed into other professional streams, but it was nice to see those names again, because I think that we're at an opportune moment in tobacco control for Indigenous people, but also for American Indians and Alaskan Natives specifically. There is a veteran, seasoned, whatever term, English term you like to describe people who have longevity in this movement. So if you're a newbie and you get assigned to be here today, welcome, because I think that's one of the principles of not only Indigenous culture, but also a tobacco movement, that there was a dedication when someone new joined the circle, then they were acknowledged, they were included, there was a system to enliven their skills, to refocus them to some of the key points in tobacco control, and whatever that meant in your community. So prior to 2000, there had been a lot of movement in Indian country to really promote coming back to ourselves in a cultural way, repairing, reconnecting through relationship building, again, restoring those cultural systems of knowledge that traditional tobacco control, Indigenous tobacco control, is inseparable from that healing movement. So then the current movement that for a lot of you, maybe your professional career started, after 2000, after the master settlement, and you came into a template of strategies to have community, to build, a movement where it had some characteristics. And in Indian country, it had those same characteristics. But the way it was expressed is our cultural way of being. And culturally adaptive programs, I was kind of jotting down this morning key points that I wanted to make. And so I've lived through best practices, promising practices, emerging practices, repractices, and so I think that there's been a lot of really good moccasin prints leading up to today in Indian country around indigenous tobacco control. And I just like to talk about that term a little bit, is that indigenous tobacco control includes those cultures that in 1491 had no cultural integration of indigenous tobacco. So let me say that again. So in 1491, there are cultures, indigenous cultures, that their cultural practice, their traditional tobacco practice was not to have tobacco in their culture. So I want to acknowledge that, because that's when you start talking or reflecting the industries, the tobacco industry's line about tobacco, but not seeing in the Indian world or in the indigenous worldview, everything is connected. And tobacco has relationships not only with the earth, the water, the air, the stars, the cosmos, but it also has relationships with humans. It has become one of, for the cultures that do integrate tobacco, there are teachings that existed long before any of our lifetimes. And tobacco stood with us through those times. And I am ever mindful that we aren't the only people gifted with ways forward, ways to repair our community, to restore well-being. So if your culture's traditional tobacco practices were not to integrate tobacco, you're in the right place. Because that is like a key nuance where I would say over the last 20 some years, I've seen this division where, and it's really like a creation of a model that came into our world. There is no difference between, there's a cultural difference between indigenous people in the US territories and in Alaska, in Hawaii. And in the lower 48, there's a lot of diversity. But tobacco, for many people, was our way. We negotiated all of that. We negotiated human relationships and keeping our communities intact. So I wanted to share, I said I wanted to present a timeline. So in 2000, we were gifted with or included, after much knocking on the door and good advocacy by American Indians and Alaskan Natives, in most of the programming of the current tobacco control movement. And you start seeing emerging issues around some of the key points in tobacco at that time: youth prevention or prevention, age of purchase. Age of purchase is always going to be another step of understanding when you work with Indian country, because the jurisdictions change. So it was a wonderful journey around that, to educate people, to educate states, to a lot of people came into public health concerned with health, not with revenue tax share agreements and the history of jurisdiction behind that. But in Indian country, there were key alliances made around that concept and around taxation. We're still the only public health model that says, ooh, raise taxes. And so we have to re-examine that as we move forward and around inclusions of different ages. But I wanted to talk about the principles sort of like in my journey to this place, to this portal that I've been on, and sort of that through collective agreements with other Indigenous advocates, that I have embraced, and some of them are very culturally bound for me. Right now, currently, we are in a Confederacy-wide, so here in the US and in Canada, all the people in the Blackfoot Confederacy, we are in a collective, very mindful period where we're making a transition, because we had the passing of our traditional chief, Earl Olperson. And so we are very aware of health and well-being at this time, of the mental health, of how people are negotiating and supporting each other through this. And we have a collective agreement where we have a structure of authority, and it is shifted now. So we're in this flex period. And so I've been thinking a lot about what I learned from him in passing policy, what I learned from him in making allies, what I learned from him in, you don't always get the invitation. And since my people didn't sit at a table, you don't always get the invitation. So therefore, sometimes you invite yourself. So that's one thing. And so I thought a lot about his teachings, but when I would go to him for counsel on, or we would be in a meeting and we were strategizing. And then later on, he'd see me if he knew I had went through a rough patch in this job. He would always tell me, "Igakimat, try your hardest. Mokake, try your best and never give up." So those are kind of the culturally based messages that I integrated as a professional. Because one of the things moving forward is we must include in that next conference in May 2022, a segment on workforce development. How are we mentoring and nurturing the next generation? And if you're on this medium, there is a generation, maybe a peer generation, that is not on this medium, that it needs to be integrated. But it comes from a principle that all Indigenous people share. And I feel comfortable saying that, like a blanket statement, because we all had cultural systems of knowledge of where we belong, how we belong, who we belong to, who are your people, where is your land, how do you belong to the land? So belonging is a principle when you're working with Indigenous communities. We don't segment out by just, there are times when age, you meet because of different ages, of different marital statuses, of different child rearing practices, like create certain groups in the culture. But by and large, it's everybody together. And I think that that's one of the really brilliant things that has happened in Indian country around tobacco control, is you start seeing campaigns at the community level that included grandparents raising grandkids, about how do you bring any of these teachings or make traditional tobacco available to the incarcerated brothers and sisters that fill up a lot of the prisons. And so what do you do? How do you include all those generations with a template that you're given? So there's been a lot of innovations in Indian country around that inclusive, equitable actions at a community-based level where everybody's included. And so I would say belonging is a principle that is reflected in a lot of programming in Indian country. And there's part of the project, Creating Connections, and this group in May 2022, there will be an opportunity to begin to gather those stories about what is fantastic about the work you've done, what maybe wasn't included in a general, evaluation or in even a conference. And by the way, the national conference, I know is still accepting abstracts. So if you have some good work, invite yourself to that conference through your good work. Because I think that that is also another thing that all Indigenous cultural systems and knowledge have. They have content to that knowledge about how people are moving forward. And really the action of moving forward for the tobacco control movement generally, I would love it if these were incorporated, these principles. One is that there has to be a collective agreement about what is equitable, what is inclusive in strategies that are emerging, revamping around more, technology to deliver nicotine addictive products and commercial tobacco control, but also who is not currently in our circle. If traditional tobacco control, Indigenous tobacco control is really going to be given a fair, equitable chance and contribute to the healing and well-being of Indigenous people, then we must be included. Not the definition come and given to us and say, okay, now be equitable. And so I would say that there's a lot of opportunity right now in this session that we're going to be moving into to really consider, like, what are those principles of operation? And what is that legacy of how we built relationships? And I think this mini forum is an example of figuring out during this time where, the last time, I guess, the force change in the US is when they prohibited child labor, and so we're in that period. So now what is going to be the integration of a way to carry the message forward? And what collective agreements are we going to come to when we're addressing beyond equity, I would say, is where we're going. Because there has to be an acknowledgement about what happened to Indigenous people, because we acknowledge it, that's our world. We've been responded, we've been resilient, we've been showing our strength, since 1492. And so as we move forward into the coming years and the coming generations, and I hope when I'm, old lady just enjoying the forest and the bush and, and the mountains, that there is a look back for me where I can see all the great work that's going to come after. And this was a key point in talking about in my community, but many others in American Indian tobacco control movement, that good people are addicted to commercial tobacco. Because sometimes there was a smoker fight. And one of the things I think that all collectively our communities learned from the war on drugs is you don't really change things if you're fighting your own people. So that's like a principle of operations, I would say. Don't fight your own people. In a lot of cultures, mine included, to act aggressive towards another member was one of our big no-nos. And so there's an acknowledgement where if you come into as a partner or you are a practitioner right now with Indigenous people's health and well-being, that you cannot ignore the MMIW, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Movement. You cannot ignore the gender and sexual orientation rebalancing movement that a lot of cultures are going through. You cannot, if you don't know what land back means, then that is a way. If currently your organization doesn't have a traditional land acknowledgement at the beginning as part of an organizational mission, it's never too late to add one, and there's a lot of great resources. And why is that important? So I think we're at a very time of where we can lend understanding We can build alliances between different indigenous cultures, but also we can flourish and include other people in our circle. So I'm hoping in May 2022, there are new people, old people, veterans. There are, I was going to say recycle, but that kind of sounds funny. But you know, maybe they went off and did something and they reignited their passion for working in tobacco at the National Tribal Tobacco Conference that will be held then. And then this is a key component over the times through different efforts and initiatives to build networking nationwide. This principle of action often came up among American Indians, Alaska Natives, and other indigenous peoples that joined with us on an international level, is to cause no further harm to our people. So what does that mean? That means the professional ethics and when you're talking about preservation of a cultural sacred medicine. And that really is what became now, you could Google how many times the hashtag Keep Tobacco Sacred has been used. So somebody just put up 5-minute warning. Woo, I'm gonna talk really fast. No, I'm not. And then I would say that really incorporates cause no further harm. And at this time, I think that the stories of during a global pandemic, which we are still in, the stories of resiliency and strength and action from indigenous communities, that is a story to be told and retold. And what we have learned from that first year. Why was our response, like for my people, so different than the state geography that our reservation is in? Why was our response, despite an international border, to be inclusive of those families up there? So there are key characteristics that are reflected in all the indigenous tobacco work done in the US. You see that, you know, not being mindful in how this program was organized today. That's different than a regular, you know, often there's a lot of cultural teachings at the beginning, because you're letting not only yourself, but all those ancestors before and all the ancestors that will come after, and you as an ancestor to somebody, you're letting them know, this is my intention. Because those values and principles of indigenous cultural systems of knowledge is what guides everything, and it cannot be siloed. So really equity means integration, means diversity, it means innovation. And I think sharing the video of the young people, but also from some of the Aztec dancers from another hemisphere in North America, South America, you really start seeing the integration of indigenous communities to come collectively to carry a message forward. Okay, 2-minute warning. Ooh, I feel like I should be going out for a touchdown pass. So the last one, but the never-ending one, is to really include that concept of sovereignty in what's your best sovereignty story? What is the best, when you came to a moment with a colleague that when you talked about sovereignty? Because again, all sovereignty for indigenous people was already in existence in 1491. And it was culturally based. So that's why there's been so much innovation and beautiful achievements in the last couple decades, excuse me, around that. But my time is coming to an end and the breakout sessions are going to begin. That rhymed. And so I hope to see you back here at the conclusion. And thank you so much to the Planning Committee for including me today.
Thank you so much, Lori, for your inspiring words. Just reflecting some of the words you've left us with are being culturally grounded, making sure that we're including and causing no further harm. We're thinking of you and your community with the journey of Chief Earl Old Person. His songs will definitely be missed. We are so honored and fortunate to have your wisdom and knowledge shared with us. Thank you for being the incredible leader and sharing so much good medicine with us. And we're looking forward to having your words in May at the national conference. So I'm so excited that that's going to continue. Wow, we've had a lot happen in the last 45 minutes, with the opening prayer, the song, our fantastic keynote speaker. And now really we're going to transition into the breakout rooms to hear your thoughts and ideas and to have time to just really discuss that. And we greatly value your participation in this short session to help us generate your perspectives and ideas. The purpose of these breakouts are to learn about the needs of the communities that you're living and working in, and what knowledge do you want or need, and how we can address them at the May 2022 National Tribal Tobacco Conference. And this is also an opportunity to ask questions and share. We'll be in the breakout rooms for approximately 25 minutes, and then we'll come back together in this full group to briefly comment on what we discussed. There will be a member of our planning committee in each breakout room to help guide the conversation and to share the 3 discussion questions that we've created. This person will also take notes so our planning committee can reconvene later to address the things that were discussed for the upcoming May 2022 conference. So with that, we just thank you in advance for your contributions to the breakout groups, and we'll see you back here in the full group in about 25 minutes. Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had an amazing breakout session. I know the group that I came from, there's just so many ideas, and I know we have, a little bit of time to talk about some of the highlights, but what we're going to do as a planning committee is we'll make sure that we take all of the notes from the sessions to, think about as we're moving forward with the May conference. So just thank you all so much for your insight and wisdom right now. And we're going to just jump into some of the topics and then we'll get into the next parts. I know this has been a lot. Please be kind to yourself if you need to just take a minute away. We totally get it. So I'll start with my group before we jump in. We had a great discussion in terms of talking about topics as it relates to cessation and finding indigenous-based cessation curriculums to incorporate into the communities. Also, there was this really great idea about, people who live in the urban areas, when they come to these gatherings, if they can have grandpa or grandma to shadow and be able to have that type of kinship and learning, especially as it relates to traditional tobacco and culture. And then also thinking about, because we're always talking about, young people and a lot of times these conferences are, for professionals, but how do we get the insight from others who are, in that becoming parents age or just out of high school to be able to talk about a lot of these issues and really just encouraging, this generation, the next generation, in being involved in what this means to us. And I just feel like, Lori's words echoing that culturally grounded in that family style. So that's great. Another one had talked about, the talking circles and being able to have, the traditional medicines, because it is such a vulnerable time, and really thinking about the healing component and how we do this work. And let's see, we had a lot. So, and then, just kind of meeting people where we're at. Chris Johnson and I were very dedicated to getting TikTok in some shape or form, especially on the projects that we're working at. So, but then, that is the digital world, and we are, stuck in this time of pandemic. So everybody's on. So thinking about, different media forms. Let's see. Connecting with elders. Sorry, I was old school. I had to take a lot of notes here. But, just thinking about the vaping and the youth. So often we've been fighting, commercial tobacco, but now we're seeing all of these new electronic pieces. Sorry, that's my daughter playing with her Barbie ambulance in the background. Just thinking about these new emerging products and how we, tackle this in this next generation, because, growing up in the past 20 years, it was like, oh, we're trying to get commercial tobacco smoke-free spaces, but now we're in this new, era with all of these devices. So that is some of the highlights from our group. And you'll see more of these notes as we're moving forward. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris and hear some highlights from their group.
Thank you, Coco. I think our groups were kind of similar in a lot of the ways. So I will kind of just highlight some of the other topics that you didn't cover yet. And so some of the things that we talked about were smoke-free casinos. So, what is that, the research that's out there on revenue change while going smoke-free? Because I think we often hear conflicting information or little to no information on that. And so, how can we share what's out there more widely? Let's see, we talked also a lot about social media tips, especially around cessation and youth, as well as e-cigarettes, the difference between tribal laws and the state and federal laws and tribal sovereignty, where that fits into everything, cultural sensitivity and advocacy and programming efforts. What are those changes in tobacco use, commercial tobacco use over time, especially, in the time of COVID and how COVID is impacting those use rates. Let's see what else we had here. Just learning those traditional tobacco ways of other tribes. What are those different origin stories? How our communities were gifted traditional tobacco. What are those different practices on growing, harvesting, and using tobacco? Traditional tobacco, and then thinking about what's the best way to teach our young ones about traditional tobacco. How can we access those traditional tobacco options within our urban areas? I know, Coco, you mentioned some urban conversations happened in your group as well. Let's see, another big one that we talked about was how can we engage the youth and really make this conference intergenerational? How can we all learn from each other? Because I think we all know that we all have different wisdom, and sometimes we all don't understand the things that we all others understand. Thinking about social media and youth, we also talked about TikTok, and I think Coco, you and I are still learning about all of that. So just a really good example of opportunities of where we can engage the youth and invite the youth into these spaces and really engage with them and give them things to do and opportunities to learn from each other, and from us to learn from them, and all of that good stuff. We also talked about Res Cafe roundtables, creating those opportunities for networking among each other. And then there was a lot of talk about creating that space for wellness while we are in this conference. And so if that's a wellness room or walking meetings or group yoga or Tai Chi. Another thing we talked about was traditional medicine share or bartering opportunities, and so things like that. So I think I will pass it over to Josh. That's correct.
Yep, thank you, Chris. So in my group, we kind of chatted about just a couple things. There was kind of just a question around like, what is vaping like in our communities? Like, what are we seeing, particularly like age ranges, seeing an increase in use or decrease in use? There was another question too around understanding reasons for not participating in research. And then these are for the first question and responses to the first question. And then medication like nicotine replacement therapy, how are they received in your communities? And also taking into factors like cost or access to the medicines, is there hesitancy in the community? Just so that we can discuss this and weigh it out a little bit more. For asking about traditional tobacco, like what are unique and intentional ways that traditional tobacco has been incorporated in prevention and cessation efforts? And then the third question we kind of had the most on, fun icebreakers, regional ribbons to help identify like where you're from and people who are from your like same region, just so that way it's easier to spot people, especially for new folks who might not know who's in the area. Networking breakout sessions, an easy way to exchange emails and phone numbers, a resource exchange for things like newsletters, access to listservs, etc. And then examples of campaigns for tobacco work, which is still along the exchanging ideas line of thought. And then the last thing that I have is for poll questions / engaging attendees live time. We're in the age of technology, so let's use it. And then I think I'm going to toss it over to Donis.
So we don't have very much time left, but I can kind of skim over some of the awesome ideas that my group had. A lot of our conversation, it seems to have been around vaping and how other tribal nations are addressing vaping. And then different or how to create policies or example policies or anything like that to address, again, vaping. And then I think another one I thought was really interesting would be what our nation is doing to increase taxes to disincentivize smoking, and what nations are doing that and providing examples around that. And then again, as Chris mentioned before, in our group, they talked about smoke-free casinos. And then another one was around traditional tobacco, increasing access to traditional tobacco land-based teachings for urban natives. And then how can we incorporate language into traditional tobacco teachings, and what is the role of language? And then incorporating more traditional tobacco rhetoric practices into commercial tobacco cessation plans. And lastly, some of the activities that were talked about were incorporating fitness classes into the conference or within breaks or anything like that. And then also break rooms to talk about and learn about what other people are doing. And then a lot of our discussion too were around like NRTs related to like vaping and things like that. And yeah, I think that was just about it.
This is Claridina. Can I go next? Just because I have a 12:30 meeting I have to jump to next. But it was great to meet everybody in the group, some wonderful ideas, many similar things. One for us that we wanted to be mindful of is that to be mindful of the new people coming in. So having a tobacco 101, understanding the lingo, acronyms, understanding the difference between commercial tobacco and traditional tobacco. What somebody had a really great specific idea similar to the APHA, American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian caucus, where they have this wisdom of elders. And so it's really just nice to kind of sit back and learn from them, but also, just learning different ways of traditional tobacco. The other was also addressing youth, understanding vaping, but then also understanding how some students are easily able to order tobacco and have it shipped to them. So how tobacco industry is marketing to our tribes and to our youth. So discussing what that is and how to potentially prevent that. The other big one too was having regional differences, like understanding having regions, like what's happening in each of the regions in Alaska and the Southwest, having those types of things so that that really can provide a way to network, especially if folks are working in those specific regions. The other then one last I'll mention here is just also having an opportunity to talk about evidence-based curriculum. So one was mentioned, the Healthcare Partnership, Basic Skills of Tobacco. I hope I got that name right, but there's this great curriculum. So one, sharing that. Two, also understanding how communities can adapt that or use specifics or even other curriculums that are being utilized. How can we best utilize some of those curriculums, toolkits, so that folks can know how to adapt them specifically for their communities. But I will end there. Thank you.
Thanks, Claridina, and everyone for sharing. Because of our time, I think what we're going to do is move forward, and thank you everyone for participating and providing their feedback. And do know that the steering committee will be meeting to go over the feedback that we received today and the suggestions, and so that we can incorporate it into our May conference. Again, please save the date for May 16th and 17th for the National Tribal Tobacco Conference. And so too, the theme is reclaiming and restoring traditional tobacco in today's world. It will have a large focus on addressing commercial tobacco use, but also reclaiming traditional tobacco use. And to sign up, please. I do believe if you are registered, you will be receiving emails from us, but do check out the website from time to time as things develop. We are currently planning for a hybrid conference. We will be watching how the pandemic continues to unfold. And so just know that we're taking that into account for how we will deliver the program to you folks. And I also want to just thank and acknowledge everyone on the steering committee, which I think is the next slide. So we've been meeting for about a year or so to develop the program today and for our plans for May. And so I just want to bring your attention to all the names here, and the American Indian Cancer Foundation for providing support for today. Artwork by Missy, which I will hand to her in a second to give us a little background information on the beautiful artwork that she created. So, and Missy, why don't you go ahead and kick it off with describing a little bit about the logo for folks?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Again, I had the opportunity to design this logo. Chris again had approached me about the logo design for the conference, and it was really like based off of feedback from the working group, and also like conceptually what I felt represented where our sacred medicine, where traditional tobacco is going. I did come up with about, I think, 3 sketches for the group to look at, which really addressed some of the issues in not only Indian country, but, you know, overall in society, looking at like gender roles, male, female, looking at, you know, symbols, looking at, you know, what is it that I think visually would stand out, but also we really rested on this this piece for a lot of reasons. I think it resonated with people relating to their traditional stories, and also just really like coming into the divine feminine, or the falling of the patriarchy, and looking at our matriarchal societies. Thank you for that. That's helpful. And then also just, you know, the symbol with the hands, and just being inclusive, and talking about really being human beings, and how does our first medicine, you know, as human beings living on Mother Earth, how does our medicine help us? So, yeah.
Again, I appreciate you and all of the work that you do for us and with us. But it sounds like I will do the closing. So I will want to make sure that everyone knows we will compile all of the responses from our breakout sessions, and we will move forward with those. We're super excited to have you all join us at the conference next year, next spring. And so with that, I thank you all for joining us, and I think we're going to close off here.